Hello and welcome to Theocon, where theology meets pop culture. This is our special Theocon Thursday session. And today we focus on parables, prophets, and politics. So I am blessed to be the founder and creator of Theocon, where theology meets pop culture. And I'm happy to have my colleagues here with me. I am Shayna, and they will introduce themselves.
So I'm Matthew Brake, and I'm an adjunct professor at Northern Virginia Community College and George Mason University. I also edit a series on theology and pop culture for Fortress Academic, and I run a blog called Pop Culture and Theology.
And I am Will Rose. I am parish pastor at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church and Lutheran Campus Ministry in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And I am blessed and proud to be a part of Theocon and the creative team and brainstorming all the conversations and things that we can do to engage theology and pop culture and talk about all those things we get geek out on, right, Brian? And yeah, super proud to be a part of this team, and glad to be with you now as we enter into this very timely and important conversation.
And I am Brian Bennett. I am a campus pastor in Pittsburgh for Lutheran Campus Ministry in Greater Pittsburgh, and also the creator and co-host of Church of the Geek podcast.
Right. Well, gang, we are here, and we have been having these Theocon Thursdays conversations where we've been, we've been in the midst of a pandemic, and we are not able to meet together. And we had to do our annual conference and convention online this year, which was really good. I was really proud of what we could do with that conference and convention and remotely and bringing people in. And so we're continuing to have these conversations on Thursdays to draw in more folks and to have these conversations. And so I wish we could be in person, but we're going to keep the conversation rolling. And so as we were brainstorming what we could talk about on this particular Thursday, we are in the wake of a pretty big election cycle within our nation. We may have people from other countries viewing us and seeing this, but don't know if you watch the news, but there's been a big election here in the United States, and a lot of talk about politics and a lot of stuff leading up to it. And it's not over. There's a lot of things that are coming down the road, and man, tension is high. We've never been so polarized, I think, in our nation. And it's not just happens in politics, but happens in other areas of life, whether it's faith or whether it's even what we geek out on, our fandom. And so Shayna and Brian, we are ministers, we're pastors, we shepherd communities of faith. Have you guys ever heard somebody say, hey, keep your politics out of my religion?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Brian, how about you? You're a campus pastor, so maybe, you
So-
have some students.
As a campus pastor, I have way more leeway, and typically the students are a little more open. But when I was a parish pastor, I was a parish pastor for 8 years before I went to campus ministry. And being the only Lutheran church in a college town, we had folks from all over the political spectrum. Of course, definitely heard it.
Yeah, and then Matthew, you run a pop culture blog. You engage philosophy and theology with pop culture all the time. And you're on Twitter. You're pretty active on Twitter and Facebook and the social media. Have you ever heard anybody say, hey, keep your pop culture out of my politics, or my politics, or your politics out of my pop culture, whichever way you want to put it? Have you heard that before?
I have yet to hear that
Okay.
from anyone saying that. I think I get more leeway as a blogger.
Yeah.
I have had people on my own personal Facebook, though, give me a hard time about posting political stuff. But I think it's just because they disagree with what I post.
Wait, are you saying that people might, if they agreed with you, they'd be fine with what you post?
I think so. Yeah, no,
Interesting.
I think I could do the exact same thing, but if I was on their side, they would be fine with it. It's the weirdest thing. It's
That's
almost
weird.
like people are inherently biased. So,
I do think there's sometimes it works the opposite way. Friend of mine is a well, I don't want to name drop, so I'm not going to say it, but she is an editor for a pop culture blog that belongs to a news organization, and the number of times that people go to that news organization's website and they go, when did this become news? Ooh, who, or why are you dealing with pop culture and not politics and da 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 da. So there's a little bit of sometimes snobbery that goes the other way around, although typically it's far more common in the religion area, is keep your bleep 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 politics out of my righteous and wholesome religion.
Right. And I get it that there is like for our whole week we're inundated by like the news and news cycle and gotcha and clickbait and politics. And when you come to your place of worship on a Saturday or a Sunday, and you kind of want to break or Sabbath from some of those things, and you want to have a break from that, and let's check your politics at the door, so when I can come in here and at least do something a little different. So I understand wanting to have a break or Sabbath from those things, but when we have this theme of like parables, prophets, and politics, Jesus's parables tend to be quite political, if you ask me, if you ask my humble opinion. They're dripping with this kind of, if we define politics as our common life together and trying to organize and think through how we live our common life together, parables are leaning into how do we treat our neighbor, how do we treat our community, and where do we see God in the midst of that. And then there are prophets who come along who either call us out or call us accountable, that how does your politics, how does your faith affect one another in your life and other people's lives? And of course, so how does that all fit in? So I definitely understand wanting to have a break or Sabbath, but then they're all interconnected, and I don't think we can compartmentalize and separate the two or check them at the door. They're all a part of who we are and our being.
Well, I think, Will, that the interesting thing is, especially because when Jesus does a parable, right? So very often, the vast majority of the parables start the kingdom of God, the basileia tou theou, right? It is specifically linked to a particular type of politics, right? The reign of God, God's reign is like this, and if that does not kick off political ideologies right away, I'm not sure that you were listening to it closely enough.
Yeah. And I think if you have an eye towards the politics of it all, like, what does it mean when Paul says that the people of God are ambassadors to this world, right?
Right.
Like, being an ambassador has a specific political and diplomatic purpose. So if we're ambassadors of the kingdom of God, what does that mean for our own politics as members of the kingdom of God? And then as not citizens of the nations of this world, but as ambassadors representing another one. And how does that affect that outflow?
Absolutely. And so we have our religious parables, our holy scriptures that lift up these things. And I don't think there wasn't, in terms of biblical times, or even within the language, within the Hebrew itself, there isn't this separation or compartmentalizing the political and the secular and the religious. It was all part of one, but they are all interconnected. And so in terms of Western life, American life, there's a separation of church and state, and can we keep it over one part over here and another part over there? But again, we're talking about our common life, and we're talking about how do we treat our neighbor and grow as a community. Is hard. You can't separate the two. They're interconnected, and so that's hard. And then when we think about, okay, let's bring in pop culture. There's modern day postmodern parables that share stories and ask the big questions of who we are, our identity, who our neighbor is, what's my place in this world? Is there meaning or not? Do I have gifts to share? How do I relate to the other person? There are modern day parables that we would say in pop culture, whether it's on Netflix, movies, comics, games, that share stories. And yeah, in a sense, they are entertainment, but they also challenge us to think deeper in terms of our identity and how we make up space and take up space in this world. So as you guys think about modern day parables and stories that perhaps infuse politics into those stories or have a big part of it, what come to mind for you? Shayna, what would be a story or a modern day parable that infuse this idea of politics that might make people a little nervous because you're pulling two together?
Sorry, a modern day parable or just
Yeah,
how
kind of modern day parable, or like pop culture within a genre of.
Sure thing. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is Star Trek. Even the founder of the franchise, yeah, Eugene Roddenberry, like his whole goal and part of his approach, at least based on what I've read about him, I never saw any interviews with him, but he was intentional about not having religious politics infused into Star Trek series, only because he found religion to be divisive. And it's interesting because people find politics divisive in sacred spaces. And we all know that religion can become, political or politicized in and of itself because it has a hierarchy, it has its own form of governance, and in the way it's created systemically, it excludes people. Like you have to behave a certain way in order to be a citizen in this particular structure. So we're kind of like, I don't know which one came first. It's the whole chicken or the egg thing with how religious institutions were built versus secular ones. But Star Trek is a primary example, and there are way too many episodes where various prophetic witness to how the dangers and corruption of certain governments and belief systems plays out. So that's the first one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, good.
But I just think it's ironic that Roddenberry doesn't want sort of religious politics in it, right? And yet the original series, just watching through that, which he is deeply involved in, there's religion all through that. And particularly around, I think, sort of notions around sexual politics within religion. Sexuality is always the thing that seems to be the downfall of human beings, but it's in there a lot. Garden of Eden, temptation. It's always it's always sex is a problem. So.
Matthew, we can't hear you for some reason.
We can't hear you, Matt.
Oh,
There you go.
how about now?
Yeah,
There you
good.
go.
My volume keeps like drifting down for some reason. But I was just saying it's interesting how Deep Space Nine sort of inverts some of that, because like
True.
they do a lot of things that Roddenberry didn't want. Like they do an intergalactic war. They have religion play a major part with the Bajorans. And we start seeing too some of the corruption of the Federation itself. Like there's corruption even in this secular paradise. Like you don't get away from it. And I think too, when it comes to religion and politics, I would critique Roddenberry there because, Shayna, you sort of alluded to this, but religion and politics, as you say, we're dealing with ways of life and citizenships. And so, politics is very religious. Politics is very theological, even in its most secular forms. It's structured the same way. You're still, you might not have a myth of a deity, but you have the myth of your nation. You have your martyrs in your nation. You have your wounded soldiers or dead soldiers. You have your sacred items like the flag or the Constitution. Like it's religion without God language. And so, I think Roddenberry's mistaken to see really, I mean, because even one of the themes you see come up with the Klingons in Star Wars Star Trek
Mm.
is, yeah, no, that was,
Here come the message on the message
please direct
boards.
all of
Here
your
they
hate
come.
to Matt Brake.
Shame.
and if you don't know me, my name is Brian Bennett. You can find me at,
You can at me at Church Geek.
um, but it's just amazing. Even then, you had like the Klingons were the Soviets in the sort of Cold War dynamic, and then the Federation was the U.S. basically. But they were supposed to be transcending that, because you had like Chekhov there as a Russian, and like you don't get away from that divisiveness when you have competing conceptions of the political good. And it's a mistake to assume that when you get rid of religion, you end up at neutral, because you don't.
Right.
Just have a different type of the sacred.
The human condition won't allow us to be apolitical, right? That if religion, entertainment, those things, like even within sports itself, like we could bring sports into this too, in terms of whether hey, just entertain us with the sport and don't get too political. But these are people and human beings that embody a certain amount of history and identity where politics comes into play, and talking about how we live with one another in society. And yeah, and being a Star Wars guy, like politics is a big part of that grand story. You have a small band of rebels with an empire that's oppressive, that's infused with this kind of mystical religion that's guiding them to do the right thing. And yet the big empire is tainted by the dark side of religion, or a faith or a force that's driving things. And it's kind of, it can be really on the nose. But then again, as we see in kind of postmodern fandom, even within fandom of Star Wars now, there's this kind of reaction or gatekeeping when it comes to not wanting to be too politically correct, or you're ruining my childhood. Even the creation of a new ongoing story within the continuity of its canon, people are still resisting this kind of political progressivism within their own story and narrative. So where we have on the surface, it's very political. There's politics, there's things, but what side am I on? What side am I not? But then, then we get a deeper side of politics of who's now telling the story, and how is that going to threaten me, my identity, or how I view that was at a certain time in my life.
It's interesting to bring that up, Will, because this is an area where comic books have had some issues over the past decade and a half. So you had this movement, particularly within Marvel, about 10 years ago, where they started to gender switch and race switch some of their characters. And they Thor was still around, but like, Jane Foster became the Mighty Thor. Sam Wilson became Captain America. Ironheart, a black girl, replaced Tony Stark.
Yeah.
And there was this huge pushback. It was called Comicsgate.
Yep.
And so one of the things, and one of their leaders, Ethan Van Sciver, who was a big DC artist, like he did a bunch of stuff with Green Lantern and a bunch of other things, was basically arguing that, like, look, basically keep your politics out of comics, get rid of your, stop forcing your identity politics down people's throat and all this other stuff. And then, it was this movement called Comicsgate, which is basically arguing like, look, these things should just be entertainment. Let's draw women, quote, some of them are like, let's draw women, quote, beautiful, which means half naked and disproportionate in their body shape. This was especially true after Miss Marvel, Carol Danvers, became Captain Marvel, and her suit became actually functional and not a swimsuit.
Yeah.
And so you had Comicsgate happening, and they were just saying, like, look, this is just escapist literature, but that's actually not true. I think you just don't like the politics that's happening here.
I think that's the important part, right? People are like, oh, you're writing that because you have an agenda. No, you're upset because whatever agenda this narrative might be interrupts the agenda you already had.
That's it.
Yeah, Cap was punching Nazis before Antifa, which isn't a real thing and just an idea, made it cool, right? I still don't think I'm a nonviolence guy. I still am not, you know, I'm still not okay with that, but
You're not cool with punching anybody. We get
yeah,
it.
I'm not cool with punching anyone. I feel like it just creates an escalating cycle. But that's beside the point. Like, you had Black Panther, and you had these awkward attempts at being racially relevant. You had Superman fighting the KKK. Then you had Black Panther, and then you had Luke Cage, which was like kind of a blaxploitation thing that was happening there, but still like awkward attempts forward. You had Green Arrow and Green Lantern going on road trips and like dealing with issues of drugs and like racism and all sorts of stuff. You had Lois Lane becoming a Black woman and then going into Little Africa and Metropolis to figure out racism or something. I forget the story. It's really awkward and weird.
Yeah. I need to find that one.
But, you know, you've always had politics. You know, even Stan Lee acknowledges that. If you read biographies of him, he acknowledges it.
And you think of Comicsgate, and then I think there was a Gamergate as well, as I deep dived a little bit in terms of Comicsgate and who was behind it and this kind of anti-progressivism. But the gaming industry had that too. And again, it's that fear of you're going to change this story, that shapes my identity, and somehow it's going to change my identity. And if you put your I don't know, it just seems like it, when people say keep your politics out of my blah 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 blah, there's some convenient amnesia there that these things all started with politics being behind it, whether it's Captain America or Star Wars or whatever, pick whatever story that it, going all the way back to Jesus being crucified by the empire and flipping tables over in the temple, then yeah, it's always been about politics and what has authority or not. And lest we think that only toxicity is only found in religion or in politics, the geek world has it too. Comicsgate shows clearly, and you read the message boards after any Marvel movie or DC movie or Star Wars movies come out, you will see people fighting over whether that was the right or correct or political correct or not story for them and their kids and their identity.
If I can just comment that I find more and more that moral lessons become politicized. Like now, even in the election, during the election season, we're talking about healthcare. You know, it's the human body, but now all of a sudden, depending on your perspective on healthcare, it's now associated with a certain political party. So it's the same thing as you all have mentioned. We read our own political biases into stories. Parables are just moral lessons. And part of why Jesus spoke in parables was because his followers did not understand. He was like, okay, you're not understanding the reality. Let me give you an allegory. And so he spoke to the culture of the people, right? So he talked about sowing seeds and, you know, weeds and things like that, because these were some agrarian or agricultural communities. They understood harvests, they understood seasons of changes and things of that nature. So he pulled from what they could connect to the most. So we see that also played out in popular culture. Which is why so many books were banned, like Call of the Wild, because it was seen as too socialist, or the Lorax, right? We have that little guy he's the prophet. He's the one like, stop chopping down trees. And so that rubbed up against some folks who were industrialists. Like, wait a minute, he's talking about us destroying the environment or, you know, causing pollution. So there were all of these messages that had nothing to do with, you know, no one was naming a political party or a politician. Just like in Star Trek, no one named Christianity or Judaism, because you don't have to. People will see themselves in these stories, and it becomes whatever their own political persuasion is. So there is a prophetic impact and power in the art of storytelling, especially when it's told well with a moral lesson. And recent weeks, our parish in particular, we're looking at, you know, the bridesmaids, the foolish and the wise, who filled their lamps with oil and waited, but they had extra, but the foolish ones didn't have extra. They used all of theirs, and now, they're asking the wise ones to share their oil. And the wise ones are like, no, we're not sharing our oil. So what does that mean? Does that mean that when people have an abundance or extra that they're supposed to share, is that promoting a message of equity? And when they say no, are they being exclusive or elitist, or are they just saying that, no, you need to be prepared? So again, depending on which character you see yourself into, oftentimes we see ourselves as Jesus, the crucified, but sometimes, we're the foolish ones. So I just wanted to kind of bring that back to mind too.
Yeah, and like a good parable, a good story, pop culture or they hold up the mirror and force us to look at ourselves, right? Like you said, they how do we see ourselves in it? But they hold up a mirror, a prophetic mirror, to hopefully reflect on who we are and how we take up space in this world and what we're doing with our lives, and is there any meaning behind that? And yeah. People will get angry and upset when it rubs up against them and it shakes or subverts their expectations of who they are, how they're raised, or their place in this world. And I think good stories challenge us to think deeper about those things. Some stories we talked about earlier with some other guests, but Romero's zombie movies, they hold up that mirror when it comes to, it's not just a horror movie or about gore, people getting eaten by zombies, but there's a subtext of race and racism and gender and gender roles, those things that come into play. And then presently, HBO's been hitting out of the park when it comes to The Watchmen and Lovecraft Country. Talk about holding up a mirror to an American identity that we thought we were, but maybe we weren't, or at least me, upper class, middle class, white male, didn't know some of these stories behind what was going on. And it challenges me hard in terms of how I view certain institutions that have benefited me most of my life. I have to rethink those things and reshape. Been a big challenging part, and I think fruitful, but I'm still wrestling with those same things.
I do think that one of the issues is that we tend to think of stories, right, as entertainment, right? There's literature that we study. There's some folks who want to study a particular canon of literature. You read these Shakespeare plays and you read these novels and you learn how to critique them and what they're about. So that's literature. That's what we engage in. And then the other things, the comic books, the sci-fi novels, those are for entertainment. Going back to this notion with Comicsgate, but in a sense, our theology prof, right, had this statement that every narrative makes a truth claim. And if we are going to be telling entertaining stories, we're going to tell stories that are engaging and fun to read, they should have some reflection and some connection to human existence. They should see the things that we engage in. If politics is about our common life and how we deal with this. And so in some cases, it just seems like all of the folks, the Comicsgate or the whatnot, were folks who just didn't pay attention in English class, right? Like, hey, all of those tools you got are ones you can use to read. Yeah, no, well, so.
Well, then I have a question then you all have brought up Comicscape and it's quite, I'm like tossing this idea around in my mind. I'm like, okay, so are we saying when people tell us to not have politics in the pulpit, not to have politics in our sacred spaces, are they saying that they're just showing up for entertainment? Like, just entertain me. I'm not coming to be convicted. I don't want to hear about what I'm doing wrong or what I need to do better. Just make me feel good. Is that what
I think there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of that in engaging. Just I want it to feel good, because there has been a divorce from doctrine, right? Throughout the 20th century, we had the continued conversation of sort of doctrine divides, right? That's a problem. Like, so don't think about it too hard. And that comes back, I think, more so in sort of anti-authoritarian stances in like the 60s, particularly in mainline Protestantism. Like the people who become pastors in that time are the people who are also sort of the dirty hippies. So so that becomes part of the conversation. Well, don't worry about it. Just Jesus loves you, right?
Come as you are.
Yeah, right.
And that's a
You know.
very,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, Brian.
Okay.
That's a very like especially in the white church in America more so. That,
Yes.
I mean, there's this, once upon a time, you have someone like a John Wesley who tries to incorporate the personal, individual, private life and one's public life, and saying that holiness is not just your individual choices, but it's your public engagement as well.
Mhm.
And then you start to have this split, right? And and there's a whole movement there, right? Like at the time, there was this sort of belief that the world would keep getting better and better, in part because that was the myth of progress, right? Like the Enlightenment brought this idea of progress. And Christians likewise had what they called postmillennialism, this idea that we're going to make the world better, and Jesus will come back and we'll be like, hey, here you go. And then like the Civil War and a bunch of stuff happens, and they're like, never mind, like this whole thing is just going to hell in a handbasket. So let's just get some folks saved, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
And then you get to the world wars, and it's like, oh yeah, this ship is definitely sinking. Like, and so you have this sort of non-political view of what it means to be, for Christianity, what it means to be a Christian in terms of American Christianity, where it's just like, well, we just get people saved. And you know who's a big offender here is, did any of you read the book or watch the documentary The Family, Jeff Charlotte's deal about the C Street gang in Washington? This
Nope.
basically, it's this group that tries to disciple political leaders, and their big thing is, we don't want to worry about the politics because we're just worried about Jesus. Nothing matters but Jesus.
Hmm.
But it's this very apolitical Jesus that then serves to create, like, there's still politics happening, but it's under this guise of like, well, we're only concerned about Jesus. But then people within that network make political connections and form political alliances. And like, if you say you're apolitical, you're not apolitical.
Yeah, because Jesus wasn't. Like I definitely agree. Like Jesus didn't flip tables over in every single room he went in. It was the temple, right? I mean, there's a time to be priestly and pastoral, and to comfort the afflicted. I mean, I definitely agree. Jesus didn't flip tables in every room he walked in. But when he walked into a system that was oppressive and cheating the people and stepping on those who they were going to serve, he would flip over the tables and say, not my father's house. And so, and I also think, Shayna, you bring up a point, like, it goes with pop culture as well. I just want to go Star Wars movie and feel good. Don't throw whatever, human sexuality or race or gender swap Jedi with me and to make me challenge me. I just want to go in and have fun. And that's just like, no, that if the narrative's going to challenge us to pull forward the story, that's a part of it. And a lot of it is, whether it's Comic Gate or Gamers Gate, we have Church Gate, we have gatekeepers that want to guard the gates of what can happen or not happen within the institutions that we feel like we're being protected by or protected from. And how do we challenge those gatekeepers and fly open those gates and make it a wider circle to bring people in to be a part of it?
Fling open the gates.
Well,
Fly open the gates. Fly open the gates.
Hey, I don't know what they
Hey,
do
whatever,
up there
man.
in Pittsburgh, but in Chapel Hill, we
You
say,
fly open gates. Okay.
hey, don't gate keep me.
Really?
Well, okay. So
Shayna, real
I
quick,
like what I'm sorry, what's that, Matt?
I was just going to add one more thing to just come back. So I want to affirm the whole, like, I think one element is to be entertained,
Mm-hmm.
but I think there's also this, like, it's like this weird mixture of like entertainment and some sort of apoliticism that actually isn't apolitical. And one example of that is, remember how you had all these evangelicals who were goo-goo over Passion of the Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they loved Passion of the Christ. They talk about, oh, it's important for us to have these messages. We have a message here. But then the year, I think it was that Crash or Brokeback Mountain won like Best Picture, all these movies that had these messages. I remember I watched it, the 700 Club. One of the hosts was like, well, we don't want to have these messages jammed down our throat in movies. We just want to go to be entertained. And in my head, I was like, that's not what you said with Passion of the Christ.
Right.
So I think if they do say they want to be entertained, I think there's a hypocritical apoliticism involved.
No.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all for pleasure and no pain. And, I get it. I get it. Sometimes you just want to come and sit there and hear how wonderful God is, and you just want to go home and not hear about how wretched of a soul we are and how we're just depraved. I get it. And like you mentioned, Matt, it's just like, there's this piece where it becomes apolitical, or this is embeddedness in there that is only seen by some who might disagree with whatever is happening. What I did want to note was there was something Will was mentioning in movies and arts and entertainment about seeing the prophetic witness being played out. And that's the part that gives me hope, because even if we don't really see some of these like apocalyptic, these revelatory actions played out in our lifetime, having the story outside of ourselves allows us to see like, well, this can happen, or the empire will strike back, or, like there are these scenarios, that parables, that comic books, graphic novels, any form of literature, or whatever can show us possibilities. Show us possibilities of the now and of the future, and how we each are various characters depending on the day. Are we the prodigal son? Are we the father? Are we the servant? Are we the brother who is like, Dad, I've been here the whole time, So given what our circumstances are, we can easily fall into any one of these characters we read about or watch in these movies.
There was a point where in a church I was attending a while back, we talked about that with reference to the Hunger Games, and how like we all want to think of ourselves as one of the districts that are oppressed, but especially as citizens in the U.S. and for a lot of, in the church I was in, largely middle-class white people living in the suburbs around DC, it was like, we're not District 12. We're the capital, right?
Yeah, good pull.
That's
Good.
the situation we find ourselves in. We're the privileged class that is mindlessly exploiting less privileged folks around the world through all of our consumer choices and in our overindulgence of ourselves. So you need to think of yourselves, U.S. citizen, as the capital, as what the early Christian church would have referred to as empire. And that's not a good position.
Well, I do want to say that, yes, the U.S. citizens should think of themselves as the capital. At the same time, though, I thought when that came out, I was a pastor in West very, and it was there were a lot of ways to see, oh yeah, that's
mining
us.
town.
Mining, all, so there are definitely ways for us to see that. And I don't want to just blanket statement say all U.S. citizens should see themselves as that, but I mean, yeah, in a lot of ways, particularly many white citizens should see themselves as that.
And that's why I said white middle class, and we were living in like Fairfax, you know what I mean, which is like middle class, upper middle class, best school districts in like
they're like, we are so oppressed.
Well,
see
and when
the
you
violence
read
inherent in the system,
and when you read the parables, the longevity or what's so amazing about, in terms of scripture or in the parables themselves, is depending on where you are in your life and your journey and in history, these parables, you could read them over and over again, and depending where you are, it hit you in a different way. And we in the Revised Common Lectionary and the liturgical churches today, it's the the parable of the talents, and as I read the parable of the talents this morning for my congregation, I shared that I felt bad for the guy who had one. He was being careful, was being safe. I'm being told all the time now to be really careful and to play it safe and to not be bold and not to live dangerously. And this guy was doing his best to just be safe. And but yet, so it just hit me differently today than it did. And so even when I watch, whether it's Star Wars or Star Trek or zombie movies or even, Hunger Games or whatever, that these story, Marvel, man, Endgame, Infinity War, they hit me at different parts and different moments of my life and history. And that's why it just holds up over time, because it does continue to hold up that mirror and ask you some deeper questions about yourself and those around you. So we're talking about prophets. What are there prophets within pop culture or within our culture that you tend to listen to when it becomes overwhelming? Perhaps there are some who challenge you, but are there prophets within our culture, pop culture, religious or non-religious, that you look to or that you follow that continue to help guide you in this realm of tension of politics and parables and entertainment?
Sure. I would offer that Ta-Nehisi Coates could be seen as a prophet. I'm thinking of someone else, but he's actually deceased, but I read a lot of his books, but I can connect a lot of them with some of the did you all hear that? There's like a tapping on my wall. It's so random. Anyway, but I love Howard Thurman. Ava DuVernay, she's another one who enters into somewhat of a popular culture realm that doesn't necessarily include the sci-fi pieces, but just very much in your face with the power of storytelling. So I'm really interested in people who are craftspeople, who are great about illustrating stories, whether in graphic novels or comic books or in documentaries. I think those are the two that really come to mind in this conversation.
That's good. Matt or Brian, what do you think? What do you look to?
If we're talking about like cultural prophets, like people who can sort of like lift the veil so we can see our cultural situation.
Or an example of how you navigate this world. Yeah, it's been 2020 has been a doozy. So are you looking towards people that are helping you navigate through all that?
Well, people, I think, for me, have functioned in that role of like lifting the veil to see and sort of lay naked the political situation, social situation of our world. I think you have to go to comedians for that.
Yeah, there you go.
If there is any, because once upon a time, the prophets were these like every, the courts in Israel had these like professional prophets. And like in some ways the court gesture is like a degraded form of that. And then like now you have these comedians. And I think, comedians, the thing that makes a comedian good is just observation and, not telling the future, but forth telling, like kind of speaking to the truth of the situation as it exists. So for me, it's one of the people I miss as a humorist and comedian is Jon Stewart. Like for me,
yeah, I love that.
And I like, Trevor Noah, John Oliver, I like them. But I thought Jon Stewart had a very I felt like he was a once in a lifetime talent. So yeah, I think for me it's comedians. If I think about a pop culture thing that helps me see better or provides a new perspective on something to show me the incongruities in public life and kind of lay them bare.
Public orators of sharing truth telling in a way that makes you laugh, but also makes you feel uncomfortable enough to you're like, ouch, that hurts. But yet I'm also able to laugh at it as well. Yeah, there's a extreme prophetic art that comes with that. I think Chappelle Dave Chappelle too, that there's a reason they had him on Saturday Night Live the week after the election, 2016, and this year as well, in terms of a way to capture that. You know, in terms of all that he does, yeah, there's things I have problems with, and there's things that are like, you're holding up a mirror here. That's making me laugh, but I'll go also be like, ouch.
I think that's the thing with comedians, the ability to hold up a mirror, right, to us. Like, it's disarming because they're making you laugh, but then, you know, yeah.
Brian, is there anybody that comes to mind for you?
I've been actually thinking about musicians, right? So I was thinking about, right, the guy on Twitter who called out, I think it was called out Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine, about all of the sudden, like, why was there politics in the song? And the dude was like, I don't think you have been paying attention to any of the songs that we've done. But I've also been listening to a ton of David Byrne and Talking Heads recently. And I think there is some deep prophetic witness within that, that just you can't get away from. Same thing, you hit into areas of punk and that there are. It is not just music to entertain. That there is a deeply prophetic edge to a lot of that.
Yeah, even like Public Enemy. I think of Public Enemy. Like, I love them in high school. I didn't understand all that they're talking about when I listened to them in high school, but this kind of resurgence and
John Wayne was a hero to most.
Yeah. Fight the Power. But yeah, man, Public Enemy. Those are great. One that come to mind and was the director Scott Derrickson, who directed Doctor Strange and then the Exorcism of Emily Rose. I mean, here's a horror director, but then moved into the geek realm of Doctor Strange, that wrapped this kind of tension between faith and science, the physical, the spiritual, and he is professed to be a believer, a person of faith, but yet on Twitter, he's very outspoken of way he wanted this election to go, and anti-Trump, and so he was not worried about his career, whether he was being too political or not getting hired to direct another movie, by being political on Twitter. He had and he voiced in voices, if you go back and read his tweets, what he thought should happen, but also this kind of art of directing and storytelling within movies, whether it's Marvel U or even the horror genre as well, is someone that I've kind of looked at and been watching closely, that I look forward to when there's political debates or big news in the headlines to see what he has to say as well.
Although, in all fairness, like, a Hollywood personality speaking out against Trump, like, he might have to worry about, conservative boycotting his movie. Like, he's going to get, brother, the guy's going to get work.
You don't think he's worried about what Fox News thinks about what he's doing? You don't think
Probably
that?
not.
I don't think Fox News would have any influence over, after doing a movie of like Doctor Strange, nobody's really going to influence it. He's going to get another call, another shot at another movie.
Right. Well, even Jim Gaffigan, you talk about comedians, like Jim Gaffigan, like snapped and
he ran out of what's.
Yeah, he was dropping F-bombs, and his wife called him out, and then he was like, "Sorry, honey, but I this is too important for me to." And he just snapped, and it was fun to watch in terms of
no more hot pockets for him, man.
Hot pockets. Well, I think the Pope will still invite him over to do a personal show.
The reality is, in the gospel, Jesus said, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's." I mean, he never, cried out upon a rock, like, against any type of empire or political person. Like, he didn't name people, but his movement and what he encouraged people to do in resilience and resisting and being generous and kind and loving, that was seen as an act of resistance in and of itself.
Yeah.
Well, see, I'm going to push back a little there, because I think Jesus does say, right, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and render unto God what is God's. Like, I think that second part is really important, because I do believe the kingdom of God is an alternative politics to the politics of the world.
Well, and I think with Jesus too, he does have that comment where like they tell him like Herod is coming for you or looking for you, and he's like, go tell that fox. Like
Call them a fox.
what does the fox say?
No.
Ding, ding, ding.
No. Oh,
No.
look, there's a mute. Oh no, sorry, we're out of time.
And that's where we're all out of time tonight, folks. We're out of time. Time to wrap this.
But there's that element where I'm not sure Jesus, I mean, you know, he looks at the religious leaders of the day who serve a political role. Like, the, you know, the religious leaders, there's no secular religious divide here. And he's like, you know, you the lawyers, the lawyers, right? Like, you vipers, right? You brood of vipers, you whitewashed tombs, right? You know, John the Baptist is saying, you vipers, who told you to escape the day of judgment?
Man,
Right. So
Matt's getting all prophetic.
Look, so I mean, I do think, Shayna, your point that Jesus doesn't give a specific type of politics that we exist with. I think that's important. That's
you can't tie him down to a
God's
political party, right? You can't
right.
tie
Yeah,
him
it's
down
not
for a
tied to
specific-
that. It's not tied to. I mean, I do believe, frankly, you could have a socialist. You could have a socialist government, and that would be fine. You could have a communist government that would like. I still think there are ways to render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, right? In those scenarios, and that's good. But
I guess I'm not trying to make Jesus a politician, nor am I trying to make Jesus like this political advocate. He advocated on behalf of humanity. Now, how one sees that, whether political or not, that's on them.
yeah, that one of the ways that I always walk the line when I'm preaching is that if I felt I needed to address a political issue, almost always, sometimes it's not, but if I lifted up why one political party was wrong, I would also turn around and say, the other party also has some issues in this same area, right? Because for me, it is always the striving of that is the kingdom of God offers us an alternative way of living together than our political system does. But
Bipartisan Jesus.
What's
so
that?
moving.
What did you say?
What'd you say? Shayna?
Bipartisan Jesus.
No, not bipartisan Jesus. A refusal to be anything.
Nailed down.
yeah.
So this for me brings up something that, all right, so we stated the reality. We're getting towards the end of our time here. We've stated the reality and kind of the myth of being apolitical with that thing. What is our call as people of faith and who are deeply committed to political matters, who are entertained by all kinds of geeky things, and we incorporate all of it together? What is our role to help not separate, but bring together or tear down walls? How can we create a less toxic environment within sacred spaces, entertainment spaces, political spaces? There's a lot of work to be done in the days ahead within our nation, and I would say even in pop culture. But what's our role? What can we do? What's next? How can we help?
Can we really talk about, so when we say making it less toxic, you know, part of that toxicity, you know, what I don't want to do is make it a neutral space, because this is the bipartisan thing. I think Brian, you and I were responding to Shayna with, like, I don't want to create a neutral space that acts like all positions are morally equal, because they're not. So in those spaces, there are certain more just positions to take. And I don't want to, like, Ethan Van Sciver, Comicsgate, they're wrong. Right? Like, or they just need to be more honest that they would prefer different politics, but to talk about it as escapist and all this other stuff, and to not appreciate where those things are coming from, I think they're wrong. And I'm not going to pretend like I think they're not wrong. And, you know, if that's what creates toxicity, just the fact that, you know, don't tell me it's a cow if it talks and sounds like a duck, right? Like, So I don't know how to, so as we answer that question, I want to say, yes, I understand the need for not being toxic, but I don't want to act like the positions within this realm are neutral.
Right.
And
Yeah, I
that's
hear
where
you.
that sort of centrist bipartisanship thing, I think breaks down, is I don't want to pretend that that's not the case, that I don't think certain positions aren't harmful.
I think one of the lessons that I use, or one of the examples I use from, say, my campus ministry, right? And we have the sort of the very standard, thing that says all are welcome, right? But how I interpret that, right, is that because we throw that out there, invariably we get people who come up with, oh, well, I'm a conservative and believe that scriptures are inerrant, and would I be welcome there? And my answer is, of course you are. But what this entails, this all are welcome things, is that we are all practicing being welcoming, right? And you can't come into our space and then completely disregard the fact that we are engaging in habits and practices that find us to be welcoming, right, to everyone. So if you're going to come in and be part of, you have to buy into that, right? You can come in and you can be, if you want to be conservative, that's okay. We've had many conservative, but they're able to go, yes, this is how we engage this. I think that's the place for us, because all of those criticisms, whether it's Comicsgate or whatnot, gatekeeping, always want to limit our community. There's a right way to think. There's a right way to tell stories. There's only certain stories you can tell, right? Anything else becomes agendas and narratives that basically those critics frankly don't believe in. So they believe that the truth claim that is made there is false. So what is our call? Well, as a preacher, my particular call, right, is to be faithful to Jesus. And I continue to see within the story of Jesus places where Jesus steps across boundaries, moves outside of constructed boundaries that sometimes have very little to do with what God desires and more to do how humans want to delineate the world, who is in and who is out. And so I believe that we continue to push those boundaries away, break down those walls that separate and divide. I think that is the place for us to exist, to engage politics. Let's not pretend politics doesn't exist, right? We are all going to be engaged in it. And the question is, how do we engage in the political life that we all exist in? How do we engage that faithfully? That is a question for us. And I believe that things in popular culture have some real import for us in how we reflect upon that.
Well said. And I think about Molecular Comic-Con here in North Carolina. They want to create a safe space and a diverse space for all kinds of cosplay and panels and conversations and creativity and art. But yet there's still a covenant and there's still rules. There's still boundaries of there's no harassment. I don't care what this person's dropped in their cosplay. It doesn't give you an excuse to go over and harass that person or talk to that person or touch them in places they don't want to be touched. Here, there are ways that we covenant and have boundaries that we do community together. And that's where the discernment lies. How do we have an open, safe space where we can explore these narratives and stories that shape our lives and our identity, but also create a covenant together of how we treat one another. And then I again, less message boards and more face-to-face conversations, I think is going to make the world a better place. Shayna, what say you?
As a priest, pastor, I believe that we have a responsibility for the souls of the community. And those souls are embodied in bipartisan folks. They are embodied in nonpartisan people. They are embodied in racist people. And they are embodied in all sorts of folks across the spectrum who have done horrible things, who have done wonderful things. And in my mind, and how I'm convicted is that I approach both with the same integrity. I'll never forget when Matthew Shepard, a young gay white man, was beaten to death. We were around the same age when I started at the University of Pittsburgh, and they had did like this documentary, and one of the doctors was talking about how, I guess, one of the guys who had a part in Matthew's death, how he had gotten to a fight himself and was also in the hospital. And he was like, here is this young man who was beaten to death for being gay. And on the other hand, here was his culprit. And as a doctor, I took an oath. I have to save life. And that's how I feel as a priest. Regardless of what your persuasion is, we have to save life, not in the doctrine of salvation type of way, but be a presence, provide pastoral care, and even in how we look at equality versus equity. Not everyone is starting from the same level playing field. And even when we think people are being liberal and progressive, there's still that ounce of like taintedness. So, I don't, I love various perspectives, and, sometimes we think we get it right, and somehow that makes us distinct from other people. Like, yeah, well, I'm woke, so I'm this and I'm not that. We define ourselves over and against, but yet we still have so many things in common. So I approach this work with a sense of humility, and I think that's possibly how we should enter into conversations, knowing that we have inherited systems that we did not start, knowing that we've inherited or been socialized in certain ways of thinking that we need to unlearn in order to engage one another. It doesn't mean we'll be best friends at the end of the day, but at least if we can have some form of mutual respect, that's a good start. So.
I think that posture of humility is important as we go. It doesn't mean that we don't stand up for what we believe, but a posture of humility and listening. And still at the end, we may be on different sides and may say, yeah, I don't think your way is healthy or helpful, but I'm going to listen to you, see you as someone who's created in the image of God. So those of you who are watching, whether it's on social media or on YouTube, put in the comments, what are some parables, modern day or ancient, that come to mind in having this conversation? Are there prophets out there that help guide you and lead you that we should look at and enter into? And then, we live in a political world. How can we make the world a better place, but also make lives healthy and better as we move forward together? Thanksgiving is not that far off, a week away, I think, when this drops. Real quick before we wrap up, Matt, Brian, Shayna, what's one thing you're thankful for?
Way to throw a curve to all of us. That's not the
There
question.
you go. As we wrap up, what is it?
Well, for those of you who celebrate Thanksgiving,
For those of you who celebrate Thanksgiving, that's true.
Everyone observes Thanksgiving in the way it does, especially considering some of the historicity around it. However, it is always a wonderful opportunity to be intentional about just giving thanks. I say, let's reclaim the holiday. And so I'm just grateful for friends like you all, for family, for communities of prayer. So I'm just like deeply touched, deeply moved, and thank God for technology that keeps us connected.
True. Amen.
I'll say I'm grateful for Rachel. I think, a potentially good life partner. She makes life easy. It's not hard doing life with her. If they say the big three areas that you have to worry about in a relationship are sex, money, and communication, well, I think I say that because I want to talk about the money piece.
2 out of 3.
Let me clarify what I mean by that. We're actually going through financial peace together right now, and that's been really cool. It gives me hope that everything else will work out too, because we've been able to talk about money, and we're both going full in on. We disagree of a financial things are leading us through it, and when there's some disagreement with Dave Ramsey, we whatever. But we're going through it well, and so it's just nice to be with someone who's also wise and interested in, being responsible with money. And I'm glad the process of going through it with her has been easy.
Nice.
Awesome.
Brian, how about you, man?
I am really glad for the call that I have. I will say it again and again. I have the greatest call in the ELCA as a campus pastor.
Awesome.
Walking with students as a companion through life and university years is unbelievable. The kind of conversations I get to have are awesome. I'm thankful for all of the support that people have given our campus ministry, and so definitely.
Good. Yeah, I agree with all those: family, friends, Theocon. But as we get closer to a vaccine, I'm just going to say I'm thankful for doctors and researchers and scientists and nurses who take care of patients, that continue to hold them super. Go science! That we know it's hard work, and the world is. I went to Walgreens yesterday to pick up something, and on the door it said like, COVID-19 vaccine not available yet. So some people are already coming in going, where's the vaccine? We saw a press release. But still it's close, and people really want it really bad. We want to get back to kind of life as we knew it. But so I'm thankful for scientists and doctors and nurses and researchers. Our hearts and prayers and solidarity go with you wherever you are, wherever you're doing. We're with you.
Awesome.
So, all right, friends. Thanks for another great Theocon Thursday conversation. Let's do it again. Let's do it again next.
How about a month?
How about around the holy days, around the holidays? We got some special things coming up.
We should call it an inaugural.
We should call it inaugural holiday special. Maybe we should call it that. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what we have brewing.